All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're unpacking a highly unusual geopolitical event that just unfolded right at the edge of the Caribbean. Now, if you've been following international relations, you already know the dynamics in this region are basically a giant puzzle. But lately, we've seen a rapid series of maneuvers that look exactly like pieces moving on a high-stakes chessboard. Today, we're going to map out exactly what's happening, starting with a really rare face-to-face encounter.
So why on earth are top-tier U.S. and Cuban generals meeting at a fence line right now? Specifically, we're talking about U.S. Marine Corps General Francis L. Donovan, the commander of U.S. Southern Command, who just met face-to-face with senior Cuban military leaders on May 29th. To understand why a top U.S. commander is standing at a physical chain-link boundary talking directly to officials from a communist-led state, we can't just look at the meeting itself. We've got to zoom out and look at the massive puzzle pieces moving around them across the entire region.
Now, if you look at the official statements, the explanation seems, well, pretty standard. The U.S. Southern Command officially described this perimeter meeting between General Donovan and leaders like Cuban Army Corps General Roberto Legras Sotolongo strictly as a, quote, a brief exchange on operational security matters. They noted Donovan was leading a perimeter security assessment, discussing force protection, safety of service members, and overall base readiness. But, as we know in geopolitics, context is literally everything.
To really wrap our heads around how abnormal this meeting is, we have to rewind to the year 1903. That's when U.S. forces first started maintaining the naval station at Guantanamo Bay. We are talking about well over a century of history locked into this one single location. And that deep history sets up a fascinating, incredibly tense dynamic that pretty much defines the whole relationship between these two nations.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates that tension. Think about this paradox. Guantanamo Bay is America's oldest overseas military installation. But at the exact same time, it is the absolute only U.S. base located inside a communist-controlled country. Just think about the day-to-day friction of that reality for a second. You've got U.S. military forces operating daily, right on the doorstep of a government that has historically been totally opposed to Washington. So meetings at this fence line, they aren't just casual check-ins. They are highly choreographed events.
But here's where the plot really thickens. General Donovan's May 29th meeting was definitely not an isolated incident. Get this, just 2 weeks prior, on May 14th, CIA Director John Ratcliffe actually led a delegation straight into Havana to meet with Cuban officials. That makes General Donovan the second high-level U.S. official to meet directly with Cuban leaders in just a matter of weeks. That's a sudden, intense flurry of direct contact that we haven't seen in a long time. So we have to ask, why the sudden need to talk?
Section 1. Mounting pressure on Havana.
To really understand the backdrop of these fence line talks, we've got to look at the severe economic and political walls closing in around the region. If we trace the timeline from early 2026, we see this rapid, methodical escalation of pressure from the U.S. administration. It kicks off January 3rd, with the U.S. ordering the capture of then Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Then, boom. Just weeks later, an executive order is signed authorizing tariffs against any countries attempting to transfer oil to Cuba. Fast forward to May 20th, and the Justice Department drops criminal indictments against former Cuban leader Raul Castro over a 1996 plane shootdown. It's basically a rapid-fire sequence of economic and legal strikes aimed directly at Havana's lifelines. And the public rhetoric, it completely matches the policy. In a recent video message, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated the U.S. is ready to open a new chapter and added this very pointed line: "The only thing standing in the way of a better future are those who control your country." So Washington is purposefully pairing these tightening economic squeezes with very blunt political messaging aimed right at Cuban leadership. They're squeezing economically while communicating very forcefully.
Section 2. The Venezuelan Connection.
Now, obviously, Cuba doesn't exist in a vacuum. The real key here is how deeply interconnected these nations are. You have the U.S. government ordering the capture of Maduro and his wife on drug and terror charges they completely deny, by the way. But regardless of the charges themselves, Maduro's status is a massive deal for Cuba, because he had partnered so closely with the communist-led state. With Maduro's ouster and Washington turning up the heat, Havana is suddenly facing severe, growing regional isolation. Their key strategic partner has essentially been neutralized. Which actually brings us right back to General Donovan. His travel schedule is like a literal map of this regional shift.
Just a week before his meeting at that Guantanamo fence line, Donovan wasn't sitting in Washington. He was down in Venezuela. He was overseeing U.S. military exercises there, flying around in an MV-22B Osprey, and visiting the recently reopened U.S. Embassy in Caracas. He's physically tracing the exact lines of this geopolitical pivot, going straight from a newly secured foothold in Venezuela right to the perimeter of an increasingly isolated Cuba.
Section 3. A Caribbean force buildup.
Okay, so diplomacy and economic sanctions are one thing, right? But there is a very tangible physical component to this strategy unfolding out in the waters of the Caribbean right now. 1,300. The Marine Corps just announced that a contingent of 1,300 U.S. Marines and sailors have cycled into the Caribbean. That is a massive injection of combat-ready personnel right into the immediate vicinity of Cuba and Venezuela.
And believe me, they aren't traveling light. This massive influx of personnel joins an already heightened U.S. military presence in the area that includes heavy hitters like the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz. We're not just talking about a routine patrol here, it's a serious force buildup. And according to the source material, this mobilization is happening exactly as the U.S. administration recently hinted at the possibility of military action and intervention in Cuba. The physical presence is absolutely backing up the political rhetoric. When you step back and look at it all, a remarkably clear four-step playbook emerges. Step 1. Isolate those key regional allies, effectively sweeping Venezuela off the board as a support structure for Cuba. Step 2. Apply direct pressure through economic tariffs on oil and drop heavy political indictments on leaders in Havana. Step 3. Establish direct lines of contact, sending the CIA director and the Southcom commander to speak face-to-face with Cuban officials. And finally, Step 4. Execute a massive naval and marine force buildup right in their backyard to ensure that leverage is physically felt. It's a completely cohesive four-step geopolitical strategy converging on a single island.
Which ultimately leaves us with the million-dollar question: what does this unprecedented combination of backdoor diplomacy and overwhelming military buildup mean for the future of the Caribbean? We're witnessing a historic realignment happen in real time. Economic blockades, criminal indictments, aircraft carriers, and quiet conversations at a chain-link fence. As we watch these massive pieces maneuver into place on the board, we're left to wonder, and carefully watch, what chapter will ultimately be written next in this high-stakes Caribbean standoff. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the board and never stop questioning the moves.